You are walking alone at night. A shadow moves in your peripheral vision. Your body is already moving, heart rate spiking, muscles tensing, steps quickening, and attention narrowing. All of this happens in the time it takes to blink, before you identify what the shadow was, before you assess whether it poses actual danger, before you make a conscious decision about how to respond. The body received an instruction and it obeyed. Only now, several seconds later, does your cortex arrive to explain what happened. You tell yourself a story. I felt afraid, so I moved away. I made a choice to be cautious. I decided to protect myself. But that is not what occurred. The fear was not a feeling you had before acting. It was the instruction that produced the action. The movement was not a choice following evaluation. It was compliance with a command issued beneath awareness. Your nervous system does not wait for permission. Emotional circuits activate motor programs directly, bypassing the structures responsible for deliberate control. The body is already executing the behavior by the time consciousness registers that anything is happening. And when you try to explain why you did what you did, the explanation is invented, constructed after the fact to create the illusion that you were in charge, that you thought, then felt, then acted. But the sequence is backwards, and the story you tell about agency is a story, nothing more. Welcome to Affective Primacy, where emotion is not experienced to be managed, it is biological instruction, and the commander is not you. Today we investigate emotion as instruction, the mechanism by which affective circuits activate motor and behavioral programs before cortical evaluation occurs, creating a system where the body obeys emotional commands automatically and reasoning arrives only to rationalize what has already been executed. This exploration draws on research into affective primacy, the neuroscience of emotion-motor connectivity, studies of action tendencies, and the psychology of post-hoc rationalization. What emerges destabilizes fundamental assumptions about conscious control, because if emotional circuits issue instructions to produce behavior before you have the opportunity to deliberate, what becomes of moral responsibility, of free will, of the belief that you are the author of your actions? The answer is uncomfortable. Most of the time, you are not deciding, you are narrating, constructing explanations for behaviors that were initiated by systems operating beneath conscious access, systems that do not consult you, do not wait for approval, do not require your understanding. They issue orders and the body complies. The question is not whether this happens. Decades of research confirm it does. The question is what it means for everything you believe about yourself, about choice, about agency, about the distance between what you think you are doing and what is actually being done. When you imagine encountering something that frightens you, not thinking about fear but actually confronting it, what happens first? The thought or the reaction? The decision to withdraw or the body already withdrawing? If you observe carefully, you will notice the body moves before the thought arrives to claim it. The emotional instruction precedes the narrative, and the narrative, convincing as it feels, is retrospective construction. This is not metaphor, this is neuroscience, and it reveals something most people spend their lives never confronting. You are not as in charge as you think you are. In the early 1980s, psychologist Robert Zajonc proposed something controversial. He argued that affective reactions or emotional responses could occur without and before cognitive processing, that you could have an emotional reaction to something before you knew what it was, before you had evaluated it, before conscious thought had engaged at all. This was called the affective primacy hypothesis, and it contradicted the prevailing view that emotions require cognitive appraisal, that you had to think before you could feel. But Zajonc's research demonstrated otherwise. When people were shown images too briefly for conscious recognitions, exposures lasting milliseconds, they still developed preferences. They liked some stimuli more than others, despite having no conscious memory of seeing them, despite being unable to identify what they had been shown. The affective response occurred first, without cognitive mediation. The emotional system evaluated and responded before the cognitive system could engage. And this was not limited to laboratory conditions. Neuroscience research has since confirmed that emotional information can be processed via pathways that bypass the cortex entirely. The amygdala, central to fear processing, receives sensory information directly from the thalamus. It can initiate a fear response before the visual cortex has finished constructing a complete image of what you are looking at. This is why you can jump at a shape that looks like a snake before you realize it's a rope. The emotional circuit identified threat, issued the instruction, and the body obeyed, all before the cognitive system arrived to correct the error. Think about what this means. There is a system in your brain evaluating a stimuli constantly, making rapid assessment about safety, threat, value, approach, avoidance. And this system does not wait for you. It operates in parallel, often faster. And when it detects something relevant, it does not send you a memo requesting permission to act. It acts. The research shows that emotions activate motor programs automatically. Fear triggers withdrawal. Anger primes approach and force. Disgust initiates avoidance. These are not conscious decisions. They are action tendencies, behavioral dispositions activated by the emotional evaluation. Studies using electromyography, which measures muscle activation, demonstrate that viewing emotional stimuli produces muscle responses within milliseconds, before participants can report what they saw, before they can name the emotion. The body is already preparing to move, already executing the instruction. And here is where it becomes particularly revealing. When researchers ask people to explain why they responded the way they did, the explanations are confident, detailed, plausible, but often wrong. Participants will say they moved toward or away from something because they decided to, because they evaluated the situation and chose a response. But the physiological data shows the movement began before evaluation was possible. The decision they report never happened. The body acted. And consciousness invented a story to explain the action after it was already underway. This is not deception, it is confabulation. The cognitive system generating explanations for behaviors it did not produce, creating narratives that preserve the illusion of control. And this happens constantly, not just in experimental settings, in every moment where emotion activates before cognition, which, according to the research, is most of the time. Fear does not ask, it commands. When the amygdala detects a threat, it does not forward the information to the prefrontal cortex for deliberation. It does not wait to see if you agree that the situation is dangerous. It activates a circuit, and that circuit has one function: get the organism away from the threat now. This is the defensive system, and it operates on a different timeline than conscious thought. The threat detection happens in milliseconds. The motor program activation follows immediately. The body is already moving, muscles tensing, heart rate increasing, attention narrowing, before you have consciously registered what triggered the response. Research into defensive behaviors shows that threat imminent influences which motor program activates. Distant threat produces vigilance and attention orienting. Closer threat produces active avoidance, moving away. Proximal threat, where escape is not possible, produces freezing. The body shuts down movement entirely. These are not choices, they are programs, evolutionary adaptations that increase survival by ensuring the organism responded to danger faster than deliberation would allow. And they run automatically. Studies using stabilometry, which measures whole body motor reactions, demonstrate that viewing threat-related images produces measurable postural adjustments within seconds. The body is already bracing, leaning back, preparing to retreat, without conscious instruction. The fear circuit has direct connection to motor structures. It does not need to route through conscious decision-making. It issues the order, the body complies. And by the time you become aware that you are afraid, the withdrawal has already begun. This has profound implications because it means fear is not something you feel and then respond to. Fear is the response. The feeling you identify as fear is the conscious registration of a process already in motion. The body executing an instruction you did not consciously issue. When people describe being afraid, they typically say, "I felt fear, and then I ran, or froze, or fought." But the sequence is reversed. The threat detection activated the motor program, the running or freezing began, and the subjective experience of fear emerged as the cortex registered what the body was already doing. You do not feel fear and then act. You act and then consciousness labels the action as fear. And this creates a problem for the concept of courageous action. If courage is defined as feeling fear but choosing to act despite it, then courage requires conscious override of the fear response. But if the fear response activates motor programs before conscious choice is possible, what room is there for override? The answer depends on timing. If the threat is immediate and the fear circuit activates retreat, there is no opportunity for deliberation. The body has already moved. But if the threat is more distant, if the fear response produces preparation rather than action, then conscious processes can potentially modulate what happens next. But modulation is not the same as initiation. You do not create the response. You might sometimes redirect it, but only after the emotional instruction has already been issued. Anger is authorization, permission to apply force, to remove obstacles, to assert dominance or restore status. Unlike fear, it does not wait for deliberation. When the emotional system evaluates a situation as one where force is appropriate, where boundaries have been violated, goals have been blocked, respect has been withdrawn, anger activates, and with it a motor program, one that prepares the body for confrontation. Research on anger and motor control shows that angry emotional states facilitate force production. Participants who view anger-inducing stimuli show increased muscle activation when performing force tasks. The emotion primes the motor system, makes it easier to exert physical effort, prepares the body to push, strike, dominate. This is not metaphorical. Anger produces measurable changes in the motor cortex. Areas responsible for movement show increased readiness when the person is angry. The body is primed to act, and the action tendency is approach, not withdrawal. Movement toward the source of frustration, toward the obstacle, toward confrontation, and this happens rapidly. Studies show that anger-inducing stimuli produce motor preparation within milliseconds, before participants can articulate what they saw, before they can report feeling angry. The body is already preparing to engage. The narrative people construct about anger typically follows this pattern. Something made me angry, so I responded. I felt anger, then choose how to express it. But again, the sequence is backwards. The situation triggered an evaluation. The evaluation activated the anger program. The program prepared the body for force, and consciousness arrived to narrate the process. You do not decide to be angry and then act. You act, or prepare to act, and then label the preparation as anger. And here is where the instruction becomes particularly visible. People who are angry do not feel like they are choosing to be aggressive. They feel compelled, like the situation demands a response, like they have no choice but to react. That compulsion is the instruction. The emotional circuit has activated a behavioral program, and the program includes not only the motor preparation but also the subjective experience of needing to act, the feeling that action is justified, necessary, appropriate. This is anger doing what it evolved to do, preparing the organism to apply force when the environment requires it, but it operates on assessments made beneath conscious awareness, assessments that may be accurate or may be distorted by prior learning, cognitive biases, cultural conditioning, assessments you did not make deliberately, that you may not endorse upon reflection, but that have already activated their response. And once activated, anger is difficult to deactivate, because the motor preparation creates arousal, and arousal feeds back into the emotional system, sustaining the anger, creating a loop where the body's readiness to act maintains the emotional state, which maintains the readiness. Breaking this loop requires intervention at a level most people do not have access to. You cannot simply decide to stop being angry. The instruction has been issued. The program is running. What you can do sometimes is prevent the action from completing, inhibit the behavior the emotion is priming. But inhibition requires effort, cognitive resources, the engagement of prefrontal systems that can override motor preparation. And inhibition is not the same as absence of instruction. The anger is still there. The force authorization is still active. You are simply preventing its expression, which creates internal conflict, the feeling of restraint, of holding back something that wants to emerge. This is why suppressing anger often feels effortful and unsustainable. You are fighting an instruction issued by a system designed to produce action, and that system does not care about your reasons for restraint. It has identified a situation requiring force, and it is preparing you to deliver it. Shame operates differently than fear or anger. It does not prepare you to run or fight. It prepares you to disappear. When the emotional system evaluates that you have violated a social norm, exposed a flaw, or become visible in a way that invites negative judgment, shame activates. And the instruction is clear: reduce visibility, hide, withdraw from attention. Studies of shame and motor behavior show that shame produces specific postural changes: gaze aversion, head lowering, shoulder slumping, the body making itself smaller, less conspicuous. These are not conscious choices, they are automatic responses, the shame circuit activating motor programs designed to reduce exposure. And this happens before you can articulate what you are ashamed of, before you can explain why you feel the need to hide. The emotional evaluation has occurred, the social transgression has been detected, and the body is already executing the instruction to withdraw. Shame also produces something that fear and anger do not: a desire to cease existing, not literally in most cases, but a wish to be invisible, to not be perceived, to escape the situation entirely by removing the self from it. This is shame doing what it evolved to do. In highly social species where survival depends on group acceptance, behaviors that risk exclusion are existentially dangerous. Shame functions to stop those behaviors, to signal submission, to communicate that you recognize the violation and will correct it. But the mechanism operates on evaluations that may be inaccurate. You can feel shame about things that are not actually shameful, about normal variation, about characteristics that have nothing to do with moral transgression. The system detects deviation from some internalized standard, and it issues the instruction: hide this, do not let others see. And once shame activates, it is extraordinarily difficult to override, because the instruction includes not only the motor program but also the subjective experience of being fundamentally flawed, of being the kind of person who should not be visible. The emotion creates a narrative about identity, and that narrative reinforces the behavioral instruction. People experiencing shame report feeling like they are disappearing, like they are shrinking, like the ground should open and swallow them. These are not exaggerations, they are accurate descriptions of what the motor program is attempting to produce: reduction of presence, withdrawal from social space. And shame does something particularly insidious. It prevents corrective action. Fear can motivate escape, which resolves the threat. Anger can motivate confrontation, which resolves the obstacle. But shame motivates hiding, and hiding prevents the possibility of discovering that the perceived flaw is not actually a basis for rejection, that the exposure was not catastrophic, that others are not judging as harshly as the shame circuit predicts. So shame perpetuates itself. The instruction to hide prevents the experiences that would disconfirm the need to hide. And the cycle continues. Research shows that people high in shame proneness exhibit chronic motor inhibition. Their bodies are perpetually in a state of withdrawal, not moving freely, not taking up space, constantly monitoring for signs that they have become too visible and need to contract again. This is the shame instruction operating at a trait level, not just in response to specific transgressions, but as a baseline, a standing order: be small, stay hidden, do not draw attention. And people living under this instruction often do not realize it is an instruction. They think it is who they are, that they are naturally shy, naturally reserved, naturally uncomfortable with visibility. But these are not personality traits. They are behavioral programs activated by an emotional circuit that has learned to detect threat in social exposure. And the circuit can learn incorrectly, can be conditioned by environments where visibility was genuinely dangerous, where being seen resulted in punishment, and then continue operating under those rules long after the environment has changed. But the body does not know the environment has changed. It receives the instruction and it obeys. Sadness is not just emotional pain. It is instruction to stop, to conserve energy, to cease pursuing goals that have become unattainable. When the emotional system evaluates that a valued goal is lost, a relationship ended, an opportunity closed, a hope proven impossible, sadness activates, and the instruction is: withdraw effort, disengage, stop expending resources on what cannot be achieved. Research into sadness and motor behavior demonstrates that sad emotional states reduce motor activation. People experiencing sadness move less, initiate fewer actions, show decreased force production. The body is conserving energy. And this is not laziness, it is adaptive. If a goal truly is unattainable, continuing to pursue it wastes resources that could be redirected towards goals that remain possible. Sadness functions to enforce that redirection by making continued effort feel impossible. The motor program activated by sadness produces slowed movement, reduced facial expression, decreased vocal inflection, the body operating at minimal output, preserving energy, waiting. But for what? For the evaluation to change, for the emotional system to determine that the goal is no longer lost, or that a new goal has emerged that justifies renewed effort. Until then, the instruction remains: do not act, do not expend energy, conserve. And people experiencing clinical depression, which involves chronic pathological sadness, describe exactly this: the feeling that movement requires impossible effort, that even simple actions feel exhausting, that their body will not cooperate with their intentions. This is the sadness program running continuously, the energy withdrawal instruction never deactivating, the body perpetually in conservation mode, waiting for a signal that never comes, a signal that it is safe to expend effort again, that goals are possible again, that action will produce results rather than waste resources. But in depression, that signal does not arrive. The emotional evaluation remains stuck. The assessment, nothing is worth the effort. And so the motor system remains inhibited. Movement does not cease entirely, but it becomes effortful, slow, and minimal. This is one reason depression is so difficult to overcome through willpower. People are told to just do things, to force themselves to move, to act despite not feeling like it. But they are fighting an instruction issued by a system designed to prevent exactly that, a system that has evaluated action as wasteful and is conserving resources accordingly. Overriding that instruction requires more than decision. It requires changing the evaluation, convincing the emotional system that goals are possible, that effort will not be wasted, that movement is justified. But the emotional system does not respond to argument. It responds to evidence. And when the instruction is to not move, gathering evidence becomes impossible, because evidence requires action, and action is precisely what the system is preventing. This creates a bind. The only way to change the evaluation is to act, but the instruction prevents action, so the evaluation cannot change, and the instruction persists. Breaking this cycle is possible, but it requires intervention at the level of the instruction itself, not trying to override it through effort, but changing the conditions that maintain it. Sometimes this means changing the environment, introducing new information that updates the assessment. Sometimes it means medications that modulate the neurotransmitter systems involved in the emotional evaluation. Sometimes it means therapy that helps reframe the goals themselves. But none of these work by simply deciding to feel differently. They work by addressing the system issuing the instruction, the system that operates beneath conscious control, that does not care about your beliefs, that responds only to evidence it can detect. The sadness instruction is conserve, and until the system determines conservation is no longer necessary, the body will obey. When you explain why you did something, the explanation feels true, accurate, like you are reporting the actual process that led to the behavior. But research into post-hoc rationalization reveals otherwise. Most of the time, you are not reporting, you are inventing, constructing a plausible narrative that connects the action to a reason that sounds good, that preserves the sense that you were in control. But the reason was not the cause. The action was produced by emotional circuits activating motor programs, and consciousness arrived afterward to make sense of what had already been initiated. This is confabulation, not lying. You believe the explanation. You are not trying to deceive, but the explanation is nonetheless fabricated, generated by systems responsible for narrative coherence, not systems responsible for action. Studies of split brain patients, people whose corpus callosum has been severed, demonstrate this dramatically. When researchers present information to the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand but cannot speak, and ask the person to explain why their left hand performed an action, the left hemisphere, which can speak but did not receive the information, invents a reason, confidently. The person has no awareness that they are confabulating. The narrative feels true. This happens in intact brains as well. The systems that produce behavior and the systems that explain behavior are separate, and the explanation system does not have access to the actual causes, so it constructs plausible stories based on cultural scripts, social norms, and the desire to appear rational. When you say, "I was angry so I shouted," you are not reporting a casual sequence. You are describing a correlation that consciousness has interpreted as causation. The anger circuit activated shouting, and consciousness, observing the shouting and detecting the physiological state associated with anger, concluded that anger caused the shouting. But the conscious experience of anger and the motor program that produced shouting occurred in parallel. Neither caused the other, Both were produced by the same underlying evaluation. The emotional instruction does not pass through consciousness, it goes directly to motor systems. Consciousness is informed of the action after it has been initiated, and then constructs an explanation that makes it seem like you were the agent. But you were not the agent, you were the narrator, telling a story about a process that happened without your involvement. This challenges fundamental assumptions about responsibility. If emotional circuits produce behavior automatically, and consciousness only constructs explanations afterward, how can you be held responsible for actions you did not consciously choose? The answer is complicated, because while individual emotional responses may be automatic, the conditioning that shapes those responses is not entirely beyond influence. The values you endorse, the environments you expose yourself to, the practices you engage in, all of these shape what the emotional system learns to evaluate as threatening, goal-blocking, shameful, or loss-inducing. You may not control the instruction in the moment, but you participate in the conditioning that determines which instructions get issued, which means responsibility is not located in the moment of the action. It is distributed across time, across the history of choices that shape the system now producing automatic responses. But this does not restore the intuition that you are fully in control, because much of that conditioning happened before you had any capacity to influence it. In childhood, through experiences you did not choose, in environments you could not escape. So the question of responsibility becomes a question about how much influence you had over the system that now operates automatically. And the answer varies, for some people significantly, for others minimally. But regardless of the answer, the mechanism remains the same. Emotional circuits issue instructions, motor systems comply, and consciousness arrives late to explain what has already been set in motion. The body moves before you decide, and the decision you report is a story you tell yourself about a process you did not direct. You have been taught that emotion is something you have, something you feel and then respond to, something separate from action that you can manage, regulate, and control. But that is not how the system works. Emotion is not separate from action. It is preparation for action, instruction to act, and in many cases, the action itself. The fear is not something you feel before withdrawing. The fear is the withdrawal instruction being issued. The anger is not something you experience before force. It is the authorization to apply force. The shame is not a feeling preceding concealment. It is the command to reduce visibility. The sadness is not emotion before cessation. It is the order to conserve energy. And by the time consciousness arrives to label these processes as emotions, the body has already begun complying with the instruction. What if the sense of being in control is a narrative constructed to make sense of actions you did not choose? Not to absolve you of responsibility, but to locate responsibility where it actually resides. Not in the moment of action, but in the conditioning that determines which actions the emotional system selects. You may not control the instruction when it arrives, but you participate in shaping the system that issues instructions through the values you cultivate, the exposures you choose, the practices you engage in. And this creates a different kind of agency, not the agency of conscious control in the moment, but the agency of influence over time, the ability to shape, gradually, what the automatic systems learn to do. This does not restore the illusion that you are the commander, but it offers something else, the possibility that while you cannot control the instructions in the moment, you can influence, over time, which instructions the system learns to issue. The body will continue moving before you decide. The emotional circuits will continue activating motor programs without waiting for permission, and consciousness will continue arriving late to narrate what has already begun. But the system is not static, it learns, and what it learns depends, in part, on what you expose it to, what you practice, what you reinforce. This is not full control, but this is not helplessness either. It is participation in a process that operates largely without you, but that can be influenced incrementally through sustained engagement. Only one question remains. Will you participate in shaping the system, or will you continue believing the story that you are already in charge? If this challenged your understanding of agency, if you recognize that the body often moves before the thought arrives to claim it, that emotional instructions produce action before deliberation is possible, there is more to consider and to see here. Over the next week, notice the sequence. Does the feeling precede the action, or does the body begin moving and the narrative arrive afterward to explain it? The instruction comes first. The explanation is always retrospective.